Okay. What did he say?
Well, good afternoon. If you'll keep your seat for just a few minutes, we will get going here. I'm glad to see all of you today. Thank you for being here with us. It's a great day to be a Kiwanian. Kids need Kiwanis, and Kiwanis needs you. And never at a time has it been more in need than right now, because this is our busy season. We've got a big event tomorrow, which I'll talk about more in a minute. And this is always a big meeting on Friday. Thank you for being here with us. Will you stand with me and we will do the defining statement as it comes on the screen. Kiwanis is a global organization, volunteers, dedicated to changing the world, one child in one community at a time. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clay, do you have a song for us today?
I certainly do. In your book, if you need it, is page 15. Song 33, I think most of us know it, America the Beautiful. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains, majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
Well, thank you all. Everybody needs a round of applause just for that. That was so good. Thank you so much. Our invocation now will be given by Kiwanian Jill Bryan.
Thank you. Let us pray, please. We give thanks for the opportunity to gather here today for food and fellowship. We pray for guidance when we are challenged. We pray for clarity when we are confused and anxious. We pray that all who are suffering from physical or mental challenges may find hope. And on this eve of our annual pancake breakfast, we pray that the work we do tomorrow and the way that we do it will reflect the mission of Kiwanis. Amen.
Thank you, Jill. We appreciate that. You may be seated. Thank you so much. We have a number of guests with us today, and as I recognize the Kiwanians that have guests, if you will introduce them for us. First of all, I want to introduce the first one. Art Raymond has his wife with him today. I don't see her right now. She's somewhere, though. But Art, glad you're here. Glad she's here with us, too. Thank you so much. Chip Winstead has a guest. Chip, there he is, right there.
Right here. He was emptying my plate over there. I told him that's what he had to do if he's going to be my guest. It's Rick McElroy. He's right over there near the desserts where he should be. I've known Rick since 1975. He was in high school with my wife back in Columbia, South Carolina. He's a reformed lawyer. He now is in investments. Glenwood Financial Partners. Rick McElroy.
Mr. McElroy, we are happy that you're here today. We had a member by that same name, and when I saw it a while ago, I said, he's back, but we're glad you're here. Hope you'll come again. Now, Meredith Little has a guest. Meredith?
I have with me again Kim Blackwell, who has a membership application now.
Well, welcome today, and we're very happy to have you, and thank you so much for the application, and we look forward to getting your check and seeing you on many occasions. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us. Are there any other guests that are here today? Tom, we're always glad to see you, and you can come as a guest or a member, either way you want to come. Membership welfare. I've got a couple of items that were sent to me. Courtney is not here today. She is going through, and this is great, her final chemo treatment today. So keep her in your prayers. She seems to be doing fine, and just keep saying a good word for her. Also, let me congratulate Bob Goodell. Is Bob here today? Well, let me tell you, I don't know if we've told you this before, but he finally went over the edge. Well, he's been over the edge, I know that. But this was part of what the organization was doing to raise money for kids that needed money. He went over the edge of the building, scaled the Wells Fargo Tower down on the Hillsborough Street, and said he wants to do it again when he's 85 years old. So he needs a round of applause. 95, you're right. We've got some birthdays this month. Do we have a slide with that? Let me mention the birthdays that have been either since the last meeting or through this week. Jefferson Griffin on the 7th, Jim Little on the 8th, John Ramsey on the 8th, Ty Hartwell on the 11th. Happy birthday to all those Kiwanians. Let's give them a round of applause. Oh.
Girl who caught a really nice bass. Don't know if anybody has a picture of it. Mill Bernie Club would love to have a copy of the picture. She was out there and saw all the rods and reels on the dock, didn't have any bait, went to the kitchen and got an oyster. She cast the oyster out and caught a really nice bass. So we're just trying to get some verification via picture. Anybody has one, let me know. Thank you.
Well, next time we have a meeting out there, we'll know where to get the bait. We know exactly what it was. I was going to mention Mill Bernie Night in just a minute. We had it this past week. We had good attendance. Thank you so much for everybody that was there. And thank you, Mel Broughton, for heading up that committee. He does a great job doing that every year. And even though he left the day of the event to go on a second honeymoon, I'll forgive him for that. But thank you for letting us go out to that club. It's really nice out there. We need 2 volunteers this week to help with the Salvation Army Soup Kitchen. So if anybody can help with that, please see Cricket. Cricket is standing right over there. Please see her and volunteer. Now, tomorrow is an important day for Kiwanians, for Raleigh Kiwanians especially. And the reason it's a very important day is tomorrow is our pancake breakfast. Jason, do you have any comments to make about pancake breakfast? We've got a microphone coming to you. Jason is our volunteer chair for tomorrow.
There we go, that's better. One quick alteration, because I'm new and this is the first year I'm doing it. I've been told by some of the folks who have done this before that it's 7 a.m., not 7:30 for first shift cooks and servers.
Well, they'll hate to hear that, but
so hopefully we'll have some hot coffee.
Is everybody okay with it?
And I'll send an email to those who have signed up for those that first shift.
If anybody doesn't like that, Jason is the man you need to talk to.
Blame me. You can blame me. 7 a.m. Thank you so much. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Let me also mention that Sandra Burkhead is head of the executive committee for that event. Gwen Vest has been finance chair. Francis Bobby and Meredith Little are sponsorship chairs. Meredith Little is our raffle chair, and Drew Cook and Hunter Bond are our food prep chairs. Thank you all for what you're doing, and we have one announcement.
So very briefly, I'm Andrew, and I'm in charge, for better or worse, of setup. And so what that means is I'm staying a little time after today to rearrange and move tables. Ironically, I wasn't even here last year, so I could use some help showing where things, but I have a general idea of where things go. And then also we need some help hanging the signs and banners. And most of that really should happen and will happen today. I think there's a little bit that's happening tomorrow morning in the kitchen, but most everything is being set up today directly after the meeting. Is that correct? Okay.
I appreciate you making that announcement. It was just a little further down my page. But I'd also let me announce that we have parking available in the church next door for volunteers and Kiwanians that get here early. So feel free to park at the church next door. The church is right on the opposite side of this parking lot. So feel free to park there tomorrow. Also, we have shirts, and I understand Al, our past president, has some with him today, and he is he's either outside or, oh, there he is. Have you got them?
I do.
Show us what they look like. Aha. It's got Kiwanis pancake on it.
Pancakes, aka carb therapy. You see, pancakes plus a sad face equals a happy face. So, and in the back.
Right. And if you could put that slide up that shows all of our sponsors, and I think that is printed on the back. Folks, we had a great group of sponsors this year that came forward and stepped forward. And as you pick up your shirts and you can read their names a little closer, take a look at them. We go from the top of the list to the bottom of the list. There's different levels you can contribute at. We just had great response to that, and we appreciate it so much. This is our largest fundraiser of the year. It's got to be a success. It must be a success for us to operate during the year. So thank you for what each of you do. We appreciate it. Tomorrow is Pancake Day. So be here by 7 o'clock in the morning to get going. Others that are signed up for various shifts come at those times. Thank you so very much. At the same time, our membership drive is going on. Robert Cooper has offered a $250 gift certificate to whoever enrolls the most new members between now and the end of December. We've got another one in the bucket today, Meredith. Keep after it. And as of this time, Robert is leading the race. Don't let the chairman of the committee win it. He's not here today, I can say that. We don't mind if he wins it or not, but let's give him some competition. Bring your friends, bring your family members. Help us do this. The other thing, there's a jar at the end of the table, which is the Change the Future collection. What we ask you to do is if you have any loose change in your pocket, put it in the jar. If you have any folding money in your pocket that's loose, put it in the jar. It all counts because it adds up at the end of the year, and it goes towards our budget of helping kids in this community. Thank you all for what you do. It's speaker time now, and we have a distinguished speaker from NC State, an economics professor who you've heard on TV, and I'm going to call on Kiwanian Phil Kirk to give him an introduction.
When you said distinguished, I thought you were talking about me, but then you suddenly mentioned it was mine. Our speaker today has honored us in the past many times at our Friday luncheon meetings. We're one of the few groups that he doesn't charge us. He knows we wouldn't pay it, but we appreciate his being with us. This year, he's come to us with a more impressive title than he's had even in the past. He's no longer just the William Neal Reynolds Distinguished Professor. He's now the William Neal Reynolds Distinguished Professor Emeritus. It's somewhat inaccurate to use the word retired in talking about Dr. Walden. Although he is officially retired from NC State after 43 years, he is continuing to work in a different way. He's continuing to write a weekly column titled You Decide, and doing other things for North Carolina State. In fact, it's rumored that the football coach is going to get in touch with him about to see what position he could play on the Wolfpack team this year. They aren't doing very well. I'm sure the media will continue to contact him even in his retirement. Dr. Walden received his Ph.D. degree from Cornell University. He's also been a visiting professor at Duke University, but thank goodness that didn't last but one semester, I believe you said. Now, an interesting fact you may not know about Mike. He worked for the federal government in 1974 as an intern. And when Russian leader Brezhnev visited President Nixon that year, many federal employees were asked to come and stand behind the president and Brezhnev and be along the walkway behind the White House and so on, and he was one of those. He was 15 feet away from both leaders and appeared on the front page of the Washington Post the next day. How many people knew that? Good. I always try to find out something that nobody knows. So we welcome, and about to run out with him because he's been here so many times, but we welcome Dr. Walden back to our club.
Well, thank you very much, Phil, and thank you for inviting me again, and had a great time talking with some friends here at the table. I am retired, and that leads me to a joke, the skydiver joke. Have I told that before here? Hands raised? Okay, good. Skydiver joke is one where a colleague retires from NC State, and unlike me, he wanted to do fun things, although what I do I consider fun. And one of the things that was on his bucket list was to learn to jump and land safely, skydive. And so he takes lessons, passes all the preliminaries. He takes jumps where he's attached to a professional, land safely. So the day of his solo jump comes up. His family, his wife, his children, his grandchildren are all waiting for him at the landing site. They're going to film it. So the plane goes up, he jumps, he lands safely, but he's way off course, nowhere near where his family is. He's safe, no injuries, but he's in a cornfield somewhere in eastern North Carolina, has no clue where he is. So while he's standing there and sort of deciding, what am I going to do? He sees this in the distance, he sees a speck gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Before you know it, there's a farmer standing in front of him. And he's somewhat relieved to see someone. But the first thing out of the skydiver's mouth is, where am I? And the farmer says, well, you're in my cornfield. And the skydiver looks back at the farmer and says, I bet you're an economist. And the farmer says, well, I guess you could. I've had training in economics at NC State in agriculture and resource economics. Yeah, you have to know about economics to be a successful farmer. How'd you know I was an economist? Skydiver says, because you told me something that is absolutely true, but of no use to me whatsoever. I always like to tell that joke because I lower expectations. So if you get anything positive out of my talk, you'll feel as if it was time well spent. Well, I want to bring you an update on the economy. Just a little review. Of course, COVID visited us in 2020, totally unexpected. We didn't know what was going to happen in the economy. We didn't know how many people were getting infected, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things our governments did, and that's a controversial matter, but did it, was pretty much shut down the economy for a while. Some people were told to stay home. Some businesses, if you had restaurant, nightclub, whatever, you were just shut. The gym, doors were locked. And so we economists knew that was going to cause some trauma in the economy. In fact, I won't mention his name, but one of the local representatives in the General Assembly would constantly call me and say, Mike, what's the unemployment rate going to be? And I'd give him an estimate, and then he'd call me back in a week. It had already reached there. What's it going to be next? So there was a lot of worry about the economy, and indeed we had a fairly deep, but albeit short recession in early 2020. It lasted 2 quarters. We went up to 14% unemployment in North Carolina, same nationally. A broader measure called GDP, you probably heard of that, I won't get into details, declined on an annualized basis by 33%. We never saw that kind of decline even during the Great Depression. But fortunately, the COVID recession lasted a fairly short period of time. By May, for example, Governor Cooper was relaxing restrictions, and the economy actually came bouncing back fairly rapidly. Into 2020, people were beginning to get out and spend. Then, however, something that policymakers weren't expecting, average person wasn't expecting, is we started to see prices rise. Now, prices in our economy tend to rise. The average increase we call inflation. Inflation just measures, what the federal government does is every month they go out and they survey prices on just about everything possible. And they then calculate an average where they give an average, it's a weighted average, so a house gets more weight than, say, a can of peas. And then we track those averages over time, and usually, in the typical economy, we always have a little bit of inflation. For example, in 2019, we had, I think, annualized inflation was 2.3%, which is considered low. So a little bit of inflation, some economists argue, actually greases the wheels of the economy, isn't bad. But what we had starting at the end of 2020 and going through 2021 and 2023 was constantly prices going up faster and faster and faster. And we got to a peak, we think it's a peak, hopefully it's a peak, About a little over a year ago, June of 2022, we reached a 9% inflation rate, and that's calculated as year over year. So what that's saying is the market basket of things that people buy in June of 2021 went up by 9% by the time it got to June of 2022. 22. The problem with inflation is not so much that prices are going up. The problem is that when you have high inflation, people's incomes do not go up as fast. Wages and salaries don't go up, so your standard of living falls. And that was happening all through 2021 and up through the middle part of 2022. Now, since that 9% peak, we've seen inflation abate. The latest reading we had for September was 3.7% year over year. The Fed's target is to get it back to, and I'll talk about the Fed in a minute, Fed's target is to get it back to 2%. And of course, this is a time of year when economists are starting to make their forecast for the next year. And I think we may get close to that 2% at the end of 2024, but we got a long way to go. So what happened? Why did inflation just take off like a rocket, like one of Elon Musk rockets? Why didn't inflation, incidentally, if you want to read a good biography, read Walter Isaacson's biography of Elon Musk. My wife is the farthest thing from an economist. She reads novels and garden books because she's a big time gardener. She's reading it now and she said, this is absolutely wonderful. Just so engaging. So just a reading choice. You got to build up your arms though, because it's 700 pages. So to hold that book, she reads in bed and it keeps flopping down. She's got bruises now because she's hit her knees so frequently. So what happened to cause that big spike in inflation? Very simple. In economics, everything comes down to supply and demand, supply and demand, supply and demand. I would always tell my students, if you get to a test question, I would give essay tests. I wouldn't give multiple choice. I'd say when you get to a test question and and I said, it's not uncommon. You get the question, you just blank out. You just have no clue what that answer is. Don't leave it blank. Write down supply and demand. I'll likely give you partial credit because everything comes down to supply and demand. And what we had happen is two things, one on the supply side, one on the demand side. First of all, and you know this, the federal government under two administrations, Trump and Biden, pumped an enormous amount of money into the economy, variety of programs to fight COVID, give relief for COVID, et cetera. In fact, if you look at those two administrations, the money that was allocated under those two administrations for COVID and COVID-related programs was $5.5 trillion. $5.5 trillion in the course of about 18 months pumped into the economy. That's an enormous amount of money. So when the economy began to open and people could come out of their shell and start buying, they had a lot of spending power. Wells Fargo estimates that at the peak, this would have been at the end of 2020, actually no, at the first quarter of 2021, household savings were $4 trillion higher than they would have been except for those programs. So when people were able to come out and buy and go shopping and go to stores, they had the ability to spend. However, on the supply side, what did we have? That term that became very common, supply chain problems. So the essential problem was we came out of COVID, people were ready to spend and they had the ability to spend. We didn't have the amount of products as well, mainly on the manufacturing side, but also services. A lot of people, the service sector wasn't fully back because workers were afraid to go back to work. And they had all that money from the stimulus programs maybe to live off of. So we had a classic situation of demand outpacing supply. That's what pushed prices up. Now, and now to back up, you might say, well, why didn't the government step in and do anything about it? Because they didn't think, no one really thought this through and thought it was going to happen. There were a couple of economists out there, and I think I'll give a kudos to Larry Summers, who was a Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton and National Economic Council head under Barack Obama. He was very vocal. I think he started saying this at the end of 2020. He said, look, watch out. We're going to have a spurt in inflation, because he was reading these numbers. And it took me a little longer to come around, but he was absolutely right. But the policymakers, particularly at the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, really didn't see this coming. They thought we were going to have a recovery from COVID that was similar to the recovery from the what I'll call the subprime crisis, the housing crash, 2008 to 2009. When we came out of that, inflation didn't budge. We had very nice low inflation, 2-3%. What happened is we had a rise in unemployment, 10%, and it took years, several years for that to come down. So the Federal Reserve and the Treasury were thinking that we're going to have that same problem. But we had the exact opposite problem. That's, I'll talk to my friend Gary here, and I guess Treasurer Secretary Bradshaw, who military background. It was sort of like fighting the last war. This was a new war. Anyway, so the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is really the point agency on this. A little background on the Federal Reserve. It's a central bank of the U.S. It's been around over 100 years. It's not a line department under the president like Defense or Homeland Security or Treasury. Yes, the president appoints the chair of the Federal Reserve to a 4-year term. He or she also appoints the Board of Governors. I think there are 10 members called the Board of Governors. They serve, gosh, I think 12 terms of 12 years. But other than that, Congress, of course, controls the charter of the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve doesn't go to Congress for money. They get money from member banks. So they are semi-independent, and they have a lot of clout. And the two pieces of clout that they typically use to try to move the economy, in other words, one of their goals that they've been given, Congress, this happened after World War II, when the country was worried, and particularly politicians are worried, we're going to slip back into a Great Depression. So they said to the Federal Reserve and wrote it in their charter, Federal Reserve, we're going to give you additional marching orders, because previous to that, the Federal Reserve was told, take care of the currency, make sure banks are behaving nicely. That's the only job you have. At the end of World War II, or at the end of World War II, what Congress said to the Federal Reserve, Federal Reserve, we want you to do more. We want you to create an economy where we're constantly growing, but without inflation or modest inflation, and keep unemployment low. That's a tall order, and the Federal Reserve has been trying to do that ever since. And typically what the Federal Reserve does when unemployment is too high and when the economy is growing too slowly, they use their two tools. One is they control a couple of interest rates that usually other interest rates take their cue from. So they move, in the case when they want to stimulate the economy, they push interest rates down. And also when they want to stimulate the economy, they print more money. And they did both of those during the pandemic. In fact, they pushed their key interest rate down in 2020 to 0%. 0%. That's why you get a home mortgage for under 3%, which was unbelievable, 30-year fixed. Never heard of that. They also pumped a lot of money in the economy. In fact, most of that $5.5 trillion that the federal government spent or in COVID programs, most of that debt was bought by the Federal Reserve. And how do they pay for it? They just print money. So they were running wide open because we didn't know where COVID was taking us. And we wanted to have an economy left when it was over. So I sort of see the rationale there. But then when they've gotten into the situation, the exact opposite situation, this was, it really took them until early 2020, late 2021, early 2022 to really come around to the notion that, you know what, we got the opposite problem now. We got high inflation, unemployment's now very, very low. We need to turn our policy around, and for the last year, almost 2 years, what they've been doing is the exact opposite of what they did during COVID. They've been raising interest rates, and they've actually been pulling money out of the economy. So they're trying to slow the economy down. Now, what's their objective? Their objective is to bring inflation, moderate inflation, and we have seen that happen, without, though, causing a recession. Now, you might say, well, why would the Federal Reserve ever raise interest rates so much and pull so much money out of the economy that they would cause a recession? It's because economic policy, in this case, is not like relationships in physics or chemistry. In physics, if you do A, you know you're exactly going to get B. In chemistry, you do A, you're going to exactly get in B. In economics, with respect to the Federal Reserve, if they raise interest rates a percentage point, they may know that, yeah, the housing market is going to slow, other interest-sensitive markets are going to slow, but they don't necessarily know by how much. They've got models, yeah. And they got people that constantly update those models, but you never, as one who's done modeling, you never know, are you going to be right? You're going to maybe be in the ballpark. So the history of the Federal Reserve fighting inflation is actually not a good one. Usually they cause a recession. The best example of that would be 40 years ago, early 20, is it 40? Yeah, 40. Early 1980s, some of you remember that. This was when Mary and I were looking to buy our first house. We'd been here a couple of years. We'd saved up money. We'd been renting. We were ready to buy a house. We started looking, and we saw, oh, mortgage rate, 17%. We'll pass. We'll wait. And that was because Paul Volcker, who was Fed chair then, we had another inflation problem. Inflation was actually peaked at 13%. He was hired by, or appointed by President Carter. He was kept by President Reagan. And he was told by both presidents, hey, we got to get this inflation rate down. And Volcker said, well, I know how to do that. He jacked he jacked the federal funds rate up, which is at 5% now, to 19%. And we had, some of you may remember, we had very, very deep recession. In fact, just to interject a little bit of politics, if you look at any of the press in 1982 or even 1983, Reagan, of course, was first term started in 81. He was going to run for re-election in 84. The press at that time was writing him off. There's no way he's going to get reelected because everyone was mad because we were in a very, very severe recession. So the Federal Reserve's not perfect, but this is what they've been doing. And they're trying to reach that elusive, what they call, what is called the business, soft landing. You might say, is that an economics term? Normally economic terms, we can't understand what they mean. This is actually one that makes sense. What the Federal Reserve is trying to achieve, and I think I just alluded to this, they're trying to moderate the inflation rate, bring it down to their target of 2% without causing the economy to crash. The idea of a soft landing comes from a visual. If you think of the economy as a plane, and the plane's up there at 30,000 feet, but the higher the plane is, the higher the inflation rate. Federal Reserve wants to bring that plane down. The closer it gets to the runway, the lower the inflation rate, but they want to get that plane landed on the runway smoothly without causing a crash. Getting a soft landing is very, very difficult. It usually doesn't happen. The last time it happened in our country was 1995. Alan Greenspan was chair of the Federal Reserve. And in my opinion, he was the best Federal Reserve chair we've ever had in the 100-year history of the Federal Reserve. He had this uncanny ability to read the numbers and understand where they're taking us. That's probably why he was Federal Reserve chair for 19 years. He was appointed by 4 different presidents of both parties. But anyway, in 1995, Greenspan decided, hey, we're headed toward a jump in inflation. And he had the attitude, like Barney Fife would say, nip it in the bud. So he convinced the Board of Governors that Federal Reserve chairs can't operate unilaterally, that they get their board to vote along with them. But he convinced this Federal Reserve Board of Governors to raise the federal funds rate. And no one was talking about doing this. That was a surprise. Raise the federal funds rate. They did. They did it early enough. They nipped inflation in the bud. We got inflation down, no recession. That's the last time it happened, 1995. Now, Jay Powell, the current head of the Federal Reserve, is trying to pull that off. Right now, the numbers look fairly good for him. We have seen the inflation rate moderate, as I said, from a peak of 9% last year, mid last year, to 3.7 now. Wells Fargo thinks it's going to go down to about 2.5 by this time next year. And the economy is still growing. We're still adding jobs. We just got the September job report for North Carolina, came out today. We had 10,000 jobs in North Carolina in the last month. Unemployment rate ticked up a little bit, 3.3 to 3.4%. 3.4 though is still very, very low. We did have a couple sectors that indicate they're pulling back. Manufacturing is one. We actually lost some jobs in hospitality and leisure, which is surprising because they've been adding jobs. But, and the same thing's happening nationally. You can see we're still adding jobs. And if you look at consumer spending, consumers continue to spend, but the rate of increase is moderating, just like the rate of growth of jobs is moderating. So it looks like we may be headed to a soft landing. And if the Federal Reserve can pull this off, what you will see in the coming months is, yes, we're going to be adding jobs, but each month it'll be a little slower, maybe a little bit of uptick in the unemployment rate. Consumers will still spend, but they're going to be spending, the additional spending will be progressively less. And as that happens, that's going to take the pressure off of buying, and we're going to see the inflation rate moderate. And at some point, the Federal Reserve may be willing to lower their rates. And again, I wouldn't expect to see that until, again, maybe a year from now. So that's the rosy scenario. Now, the non-rosy scenario is that no, we don't go through any of that. We have a traditional recession. We have a crash in spending. We have a crash in the job market, maybe. But even if that happened, I can't see unemployment going up to higher than 5%, which would be a very, very low for a recession. But I think right now, the way I'm looking at the data, and I think most economists, that right now, there was a new survey put out by economists. Yes, economists do get surveyed. And 55% are now saying there'll be no recession in 2024, whereas a year ago it was the exact opposite. 45% said no recession, 55% said yes recession. So the one big wild card now, we have a new wild card in the last, 2 weeks that we hadn't been contemplating, the war in the Middle East. How could that affect the economy? Well, you know the answer, oil. If you could think of a scenario, if the US gets involved, if Iran gets involved, and if Iran gets involved, probably one of the first things that either the Israelis or us will take out their refineries. We'll try to bomb their wherever they're doing their nuclear stuff. And if you take out their refineries, you prevent them from exporting oil. That'll cause oil markets prices to jump. Already oil prices are up around $90 a barrel. They had been down in the 70 range just a couple of months ago. And Goldman Sachs has a forecast. If the scenario I just gave you happens, we'd see oil prices go to $125 a barrel, and gas prices would probably go up about $1 from where they are right now. So there's more than just geopolitics involved with the Middle East. There's obviously some economic issues. Let me shift to North Carolina. We're all in North Carolina, wonderful state. This is not my state of birth, but it's a state we've been here. Mary and I have been here almost 45 years, love North Carolina, have no inkling to move out of North Carolina. Of course, what is widely known about North Carolina is we've got a good economy, we're a business-friendly state, we have relatively low tax rates on income, for example. We have the press likes to play up differences between, in this case, a Democrat governor and a Republican administration. When it comes to recruiting business, my perception is they work pretty well together. And I think who was it rated us, I think the last 2 years, the #1 state for economic development, for attracting businesses. If you look at the aggregate numbers in North Carolina in terms of income growth, GDP growth, et cetera, they're very, very good. But especially those of you who are born and raised here, spent all your life here, there is not one North Carolina. You've got at least 2 North Carolinas. You've got the metro areas, Raleigh, Durham, Charlotte, Wilmington, Asheville, Greensboro, Winston. If you look at the metros, they've been going gangbusters. Triad not as much as the others, but they've been going gangbusters. That's where a lot of the tech growth has been. That's where financial growth has been, healthcare growth, et cetera. But if you go out beyond the metros and look at the rural areas, a lot of counties that are struggling. I was just down in Clinton. Notice I pronounced that right, not Clinton, Clinton. I gave a talk a couple of weeks ago. They are trying to get their economy growing faster. I think in the 2020 census, what was it, 15 of our counties, is it 15, maybe closer to 20, are losing population. Obviously, if you're growing economically, you're not losing population. So I think one of the objectives of North Carolina, whomever the next governor will be, should be to, and not that Governor Cooper and previous governors haven't done this, is to try to bring up those counties and regions of the state that have not been growing very rapidly. I think there's some exciting possibilities. I think in terms of agriculture, for example, one of the projects I worked on last year as a consultant, can't tell you too much about this, but one of the problems in agriculture, especially down east in hog agriculture, did you know that hogs release a lot of CO2? They do, and they create smells. The disposal of their waste is a little iffy there. So I worked with a company that has some technology that they're working on that maybe could handle that. That would be a big plus for down east. There's been money in the infrastructure money that was passed in Congress a couple of years ago or a year and a half ago for expanding broadband. We need to get broadband everywhere in the state. You can't do business really without broadband. And then also, I think, I actually wrote a book about this. If you want to see the books I've written, just go on Amazon, pull my name up as an author on an author page. But the idea of remote work, that's obviously been one of the big changes, big legacies of COVID. Just to give you a little background, if you look at remote work, and incidentally, how does the government define remote work? The statistics you read on remote work, what does it mean to work remotely? It doesn't mean you work every day at home. It means that you work at least 2 days a week at home. If you're a person who works 2 days a week at home and the other 2 or 3 days in the office, you're considered a remote worker. If you use that metric, pre-COVID, remote work was only 8% of the workforce. Only 8% of the workforce would qualify by that definition I gave you as working remotely. During the pandemic, when people were told to stay home, Zoom was created, of course, and businesses tried to work around that. 60% of the workforce was working remotely. Now it's around 30, and the experts, and if you want to really delve into this, there's a remote work center out at Stanford. I can't remember the professor's name, but he's Mr. Remote Work, does all the work that at least I follow on remote work. He thinks 30% that over the next several decades, we're going to be somewhere between 30 and 40% of remote working. My point with respect to rural North Carolina is think about, just let me give you an example. You know that Apple's coming to Raleigh. They've already broken ground for their facility in RTP. Several thousand workers, I think, will be associated with Apple. Think about this possibility. If you are, let's say, a young family, young worker with family coming to Raleigh, and you look at housing prices in Raleigh, maybe you're just starting out, you don't have those really super high Apple salaries, you're just starting out. You look at the housing prices in Raleigh and go, my gosh, it's just in the neighborhood. I don't live but about 5 miles from here in West Raleigh. New houses that are being built in my neighborhood that are just, in my opinion, my wife's opinion, she's the expert, are just pretty standard houses. There's nothing fancy about them. They're on tiny little lots. $750,000. $750,000. We bought our house several decades ago. We paid $135,000. So if you take my example of this new young family moving to Raleigh and being shocked by the housing prices, what if they could remotely work and move down to Clinton, for example? If you move from a metro area in North Carolina to a rural area in North Carolina, take the same sized house, pick up whatever size is, you're going to cut your housing costs, or the price of the house is going to be cut in half if you move to a rural area. So instead of $750,000, you'd be paying whatever, $325,000, or no, that's more than that. Thank you, $375,000. So anyway, I think there's some interesting trends that could develop from that. Okay, I want to leave time for questions. I want to address. I do this so much that I know the questions you're going to ask. So at least I know some of them. So I'm going to go ahead and ask myself 2 of the questions that I know one of you are going to ask. And the 2 questions refer to national debt and Social Security. Let me take Social Security first. I'm on Social Security. My wife's on Social Security. It's important in our budgets. Yet the Social Security Administration every year puts out a report. They're very honest. They put out a report and they tell us, among other things, when are they going to run out of money? And they're very honest about it. And Social Security right now, the latest report says, I think it's 2033. They're not going to have enough money to meet their promises. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean if you're on Social Security, you're not going to get a check. You will. It's just not going to be as much as you were promised. In fact, in 2033, Social Security says it'll be about 75% of what you were promised. And if nothing's done, it'll continue to go down as the years march on. So that's a problem that affects a lot of people in this room, I suspect, and affects even more so in the nation because people over age 65 are the fastest growing demographic. So what's going to happen? Fortunately, we've been down this road before. The aforementioned Alan Greenspan, before he was chair of the Federal Reserve, 1980, 81, 82, I forget the exact year, same problem in Social Security. Social Security was saying, hey, within 10 years, we're not going to have enough money. and that was widely known. President Reagan appointed a commission. He put Greenspan in charge of it. He had Republicans, he had Democrats, he had labor, he had business, and they said, give me recommendations to hash this out so that we can get back to business. And they did. A lot of the recommendations were not taken well. For example, tax rates went up. Some other things happened. But we're still living on the implementation of those recommendations that carried us through to now. My prediction is we're going to have the same thing happen. I would say around 2030, whomever's president will say, and looking ahead that, hey, we only got 2 or 3 years before the system's going to crash. Another commission, another set of recommendations, and then we'll go from there. So now you might be saying, why don't they do it now? Well, many of you are much more politically savvy than I am. It's because all the recommendations aren't going to be pleasing to people. So if you're a politician, you want to push that making those hard choices farther out. So they don't want to do it now, but they'll have to do it at some point. So that's my recommendation, what's going to happen on Social Security. In terms of the debt, the key metric, at least that economists look at on the cost of the debt, is not the size of the debt per se. It's the carrying cost of the debt. Example of that, a different example of that would be if you buy a house, it's not necessarily, and you're going to borrow, let's just say you're going to borrow all the money to buy the house. It's not as important to know the cost of the house you're buying, but it's more important to know is the size of the interest payment, the mortgage payment you're going to have to make, and then how much is that taking of your budget? That's the real key. And right now, well, if you go back 10 years ago, we actually saw that percentage. So what I'm going to give you is this is the percentage of interest payments on the national debt as a percent of the entire federal budget. That was going down over the last 10 years because interest rates were going down. So even though the debt was going up, the carrying costs were going down. Now we're in the opposite situation. The interest costs are going up because interest rates are going up, and the projections from the Treasury Department are that we're not back to where we were pre-1990s, roughly 1980s, in terms of the percent that is being taken out of the federal budget for debt and for interest on the national debt, but we're headed that direction. So that's the problem, and of course there are lots of ways through that. Okay, I'm getting the hook. Do you want me to ask for more questions, or you want me to move out of the way?
See you right up here, right after the meeting. These people are set in their ways. They like to leave it.
I've been trained by
all the time. Okay. Let's give him a round of applause. He's doing a great job, and we appreciate that. Just a couple of reminders: park in the parking lot across the way next time, or in the morning. Be here at 7:30. 7 o'clock, okay? Be here at 7. I'll have to remember that myself. And I'm going to get him to sign a book because he has spoken today. We give a book to a library each week for the person that has spoken. So I'll get that to him, get him to sign it. Be sure to come tomorrow. The more people we have, the less work everybody will have to do. If you can stay after the meeting, help get the chairs and the rows in order. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for being a Kiwanian. Meeting adjourned.